We begin with breaking news tonight. Canada Post workers are on strike across the country. This is a live shot of the Canada Post depot in northeast Calgary, where you can see workers on the picket line already.
As the Canada Post strike hits day 10, no resolutions are on the horizon. Sean Oldenburg, president of the Fredericton-Ormoncto branch of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, says communication is at a disconnect.
Canada Post workers are on strike across the country. Picket lines have formed from Calgary to Montreal as tens of thousands of postal workers walk off the job. But this isn't just another labor dispute. This strike comes at a critical moment, right as the federal government announced that Canada Post is effectively insolvent, having lost over $5 billion since 2018. The government's solution? Dramatic cuts to service, including the end of door-to-door delivery for millions of Canadians within 9 years. Today, we're breaking down what's really happening, what it means for ordinary Canadians, and why this matters far beyond just getting your mail. Let's start with the numbers, because they're staggering. Since 2018, Canada Post has accumulated more than $5 billion in losses. This year alone, the Crown Corporation is projected to lose another $1.5 billion. To put that in perspective, Canada Post is bleeding approximately $4 million per day. The reasons are complex, but not unique to Canada. Postal services worldwide are facing similar challenges. Letter mail volume has declined dramatically as people shift to email and digital communication. Between 2008 and 2020, letter mail volumes in Canada dropped by more than 40%. While package delivery has grown, thanks to online shopping, it hasn't been enough to offset the losses from letter mail. Package delivery is also more competitive, with private companies like FedEx, UPS, and Amazon taking significant market share. The result is a Crown Corporation that the government now says is unsustainable in its current form. In response, Ottawa issued a directive demanding immediate changes to how Canada Post operates, and these changes are significant. Here's what the federal government has ordered Canada Post to do. First, end door-to-door delivery. Currently, about 4 million Canadian addresses still receive mail at their doorstep. Within the next 9 years, all of these households will transition to community mailboxes. 3/4 of Canadians already use community mailboxes, but this change will affect the remaining quarter, particularly in older urban neighborhoods. Second, slow down delivery standards. Letter mail that currently takes 2 to 4 days will now take up to 7 days. This affects everything from bank statements to legal documents to medical correspondence. Third, reform rural post office operations. Changes are coming to how rural post offices function, though specific details are still being finalized. The government estimates these measures will save approximately $500 million per year. That's a significant sum, but it's important to note, it doesn't eliminate the deficit. It reduces annual losses but doesn't bring Canada Post back to profitability. Transport Minister Stephen McKinnon emphasized that Canada Post has an obligation to serve all Canadians in every community in Canada, and that will not change. But critics, including the Postal Workers Union, argue that cutting services while claiming to maintain obligations is contradictory. The Canadian Union of Postal Workers has been in stalled contract negotiations with Canada Post for months. When the government announced these service cuts, union members walked off the job. Jim Gallant, representing the union, put it bluntly, "When you drop delivery to all these points of call, there's going to be huge job loss. And we're not going to take that lying down." The union's concerns are multi-layered. Job losses, reducing delivery frequency, and eliminating door-to-door service will inevitably mean fewer routes and fewer postal workers needed. The union fears thousands of jobs could be lost. Service degradation. Union representatives argue that instead of improving Canada Post to compete better, the government is dismantling it. They point out that while Canada Post is being scaled back, private companies like FedEx and UPS continue to grow, and their profits leave Canada. Timing. The union views the government's announcement during labor negotiations as pressure tactics, undermining their bargaining position. Gallant made an interesting point in a recent interview. The only way to stability with the post office is to get a collective agreement with us and stop all these games. From the union's perspective, labor uncertainty itself contributes to Canada Post's instability. They argue that a fair contract would improve worker morale and productivity, potentially helping the corporation's financial situation. So how will these changes affect ordinary Canadians? For urban residents, if you currently get mail delivered to your door, you'll eventually receive mail at a community mailbox instead. This means walking to a centralized location, potentially several blocks away, in all weather conditions. For elderly residents or those with mobility issues, this presents real challenges. For rural Canadians, the concerns are even more acute. Many rural communities rely heavily on Canada Post for more than just mail. Rural post offices often serve as community hubs and provide services that aren't easily available elsewhere. Changes to rural operations could significantly impact small communities. Delivery times. If you're waiting for something time-sensitive, a government document, a medical test result, a legal notice, prepare for longer waits. 7 days is a significant delay compared to the current 2 to 4 day standard. Small businesses. Many small businesses still rely on mail for invoicing, contracts, and correspondence. Slower delivery times could affect cash flow and business operations. That said, it's worth noting that package delivery, what most people care about for online shopping, is not changing. These reforms specifically target letter mail. Public opinion is divided. Some Canadians argue that in a digital age, these changes make sense and align with how people actually use postal services. Others see them as abandoning vulnerable populations who depend on traditional mail service. It's important to understand that Canada Post's struggles aren't unique. The United States Postal Service has faced similar challenges, with ongoing debates about privatization and service cuts. In 2020, the USPS reported a net loss of $9.2 billion. Royal Mail in the United Kingdom has also struggled financially and has reduced delivery frequency for certain types of mail. Australia Post ended Saturday letter deliveries in 2016 to reduce costs. The fundamental issue is global. As societies digitize, traditional postal services built for a letter-heavy world are struggling to adapt. The business model that worked for decades no longer functions in the same way. However, this doesn't mean the situation is hopeless or that dramatic cuts are the only solution. Some experts argue that Canada Post could be repositioned to focus on growing areas, like last-mile package delivery, especially in rural areas where private companies are less interested in operating. Others suggest Canada Post could expand into financial services or other community services, particularly in underserved areas. In fact, Canada Post already offers some financial services and could potentially do more. The question isn't just whether Canada Post can survive, it's what role we want a national postal service to play in a digital age. The strike, the financial crisis, and the service cuts all point to a fundamental question. What do we want from our postal service in the 21st century? Is it purely a commercial operation that needs to break even? Or is it a public service worth subsidizing to ensure all Canadians have access to mail delivery? Should we accept scaled-back service as inevitable, or should we invest in transforming Canada Post into something that meets modern needs? These aren't easy questions, and they don't have simple answers. What's clear is that the current situation is unsustainable. Whether the government's plan is the right solution or whether better alternatives exist remains hotly debated. For now, postal workers are on the picket lines. Millions of Canadians face changes to how they receive mail, and a crown corporation that's been part of Canadian life for generations is being fundamentally restructured. What do you think? Should Canada Post be scaled back to save money, or should we invest in reimagining what a modern postal service could be? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.